Kaijudo is, or rather was, a 52-episode, 2-season cartoon show which aired on the Hub Network between June 2012 to December 2013. Despite a strong pedigree of names on the production staff, including Marty Eisenberg, Andrew R. Robinson, and Henry Gilroy, Kaijudo unfortunately seems to have fallen through the cracks in the action animation fandom. Given that it's now premiered in its entirety, I feel there's never been a better time to give it a glowing personal recommendation. Remember Duel Masters? Yeah, this kid? Okay, forget that. This is totally different. Very loosely based on the Wizards of the Coast, a current Hasbro subsidiary trading card game, Kaijudo Rise of the Duel Masters tells the story of 3 American teenagers from radically different backgrounds. Asian American Ray Pierce Okamoto, Gabe Wallace, and Ali Underhill as they are swept up into the world of Kaijudo and the Duel Masters. The premise is straightforward enough, particularly for those with a passing familiarity in Mon anime. Ray and Co. gain the ability to summon fantastical creatures, the Kaiju, from an alternate dimension, the Veil, for dueling, friendship, and combat. They are guided on their quest by a multinational council of Duel Masters who keep the 2 worlds peacefully separated and fight the evil forces of the Choten, who intend to enslave Kaiju for warfare and profit. As the series progresses, the group finds themselves traveling between the 2 worlds, coming up against colorful creatures, and becoming increasingly embroiled in warfare between not only the Choten and the Duel Masters, but amongst the Kaiju nations themselves. Kaijudo hits a lot of checkboxes for an entertaining show right off the bat. Consistent animation and style, character designs by David Corman take a while to get used to, but really help emphasize the show's diverse cast, and the monster designs are superb. Excellent voice acting, including David Sobolov and John DiMaggio, and long-term story arcs with multi-part episodes. Like many action-adventure cartoons, it takes a few episodes to find its feet, but once the stage is set and the plot kicks into high gear, we're going to some truly weird and wonderful places. Where Kaijudo really shines, though, is in its cast and structure. The show employs the whole 2 guys, a girl, and the plot premise, which is a trope I actually like so long as the writers get flexible with the traits or roles said characters have. And thankfully, injecting new ideas into well-trodden narrative paths seems to be the principle Kaijudo is based on. The biggest standout for me in the cast is Ray. It's cool to see a half-Japanese, half-Caucasian protagonist in an American cartoon series, and having him design-wise skew more towards the Japanese side. I also like how Ray's mom is the white half of the equation, since depicting white women with Asian men is, oddly enough, a rare sight still in popular Western media. In terms of personality, Ray is a very well-balanced protagonist. He's proud of both sides of his family, doesn't let anybody disrespect him or his friends, and encourages both Kaiju and humans alike to question injustices/aggressions against people based on their heritage. He's polite to his mother and grandfather while still impulsive and headstrong enough to be realistically flawed. That being said, the show makes a point to demonstrate that Ray's refusal to accept rules blindly, such as the Kaiju handling codes or Kaiju's own social stratification, is a good quality to have, since it allows him and his pals to tackle some of the accepted power imbalances the Kaiju temple adheres to. He reminds me a lot of Rex from Generator Rex, in a good way. That's another cartoon that never really got its due. You should check it out, maybe. Tatsuri in the Unchained, aka Bob, there's an explanation for that, serves as Ray's best friend and monster partner, as well as the mascot character for the overall franchise. He's a half-dragon, half-quill spike, and forms a parallel to Ray's own split identity. It's also kind of refreshing to have the protagonist buddy up to a pretty fearsome-looking critter and not a plush-ready model like Pikachu or Agumon. Gabe's pretty cute. Though he's the physically largest of the 3 children, his signature Kaiju, Glurgle, is the smallest and stacked more towards strategy and tech building rather than physical combat. Speaking of unexpected roles, Ali started out looking like a fairly traditional girly character, wealthy, popular, outspoken, and critical of the 2 guys' behavior and choices, but the show does some neat stuff with her once you get past episode 5 or so. Since Gabe is the idea and tech guy and Ray is kind of the heart, Ali gets to be the number 2 heavy hitter, and while she may be the shortest of the 3 kids, her beast, Squeaky, is not, and perhaps the most visually disturbing of the 3 main Kaiju. I find the decision to associate Ali with darkness very interesting, because she's also the sly and manipulative face man of the group. Actually, Ali's character is perhaps the most dark and complex of the entire main cast, and I appreciate taking the female character to these kind of weird places. Unfortunately, I can't really talk about this too much because we start to get into spoiler territory. Basically, Ali is really interesting, and she does some interesting things. The Choten, as a structure, are just threatening enough without being too scary or too indomitable. It's established that they've got a long-term evil plot brewing involving the creature monarchs, and this allows Rei and Co. to triumph in individual episodes or thwart minor schemes, while still leaving the bad guys intimidating and in control. It's kind of like what they did with Xanatos and Gargoyles. Speaking of which, I really like the whole scheme. They're trying to exploit the kaiju for their magical energy as a sustainable and infinite energy source. It's little details like that which give the setting a smidge more believability, while still staying in the realm of fun fantasy. Kaijudo takes a complex approach to the Duel Masters both as individual characters and as a representation of worldview. Like the kids, the Masters are all varied in terms of design, cultural background, mannerisms, and talents, but also form a collective that allows for some kind of transgressive themes to be discussed. While they're the overarching power structure our heroes are learning from and report to, they are not framed as infallible or necessarily morally righteous. A point is brought up early in the season directed at the protagonists, that the Council of Masters really isn't that different from the Choten in terms of kaiju interaction. The Masters maintain peace between kaiju and humanity essentially via segregation, keeping the worlds separate, erasing the memories of people who interact with kaiju, and rarely venturing into the Veil. They also have intense and disturbingly dehumanizing restrictions on how they interact with kaiju, such as no touching, no befriending, and no communication, save for direct commands by gauntlets. They utilize kaiju for battling purposes in the big picture name of keeping the worlds safe, but offer little back to the individual kaiju they are essentially exploiting for labor. This is not a show where the Mons will be automatically complicit with human instruction. We're working with Digimon rules here, not Pokemon. Kaiju are sentient creatures with their own identity, agency, world, and social structures. Furthermore, we as the audience are shown that kaiju will attack, dismember, kill, and even eat humans if you're not too careful. We venture into the Veil early in the first season, and we witness that kaiju maintain a lot of the same social problems humanity does, such as racism, classism, slavery, etc. So to an extent the Master's concerns are valid, but by that same token, the kaiju being independent sentient creatures, with all the same potential and imperfections that human beings have, it makes the Council's cold control over them all the more distressing. Okay, you say, yes, charming cast, cool setup, but what's Kaijudo really about? What's the appeal or depth that raises this a cut above your standard action cartoon fare? Well, you've got some attitude, mister. I've often heard Kaijudo described as a show about bullying, but...
Leave him alone, Carney. Or what? Half Japanese, half white boy's gonna half ninja me? Do you have half a black belt? Hey, he's only half good at math. Probably only uses one chopstick, too.
Do you think I'm ashamed of who I am? I'm proud of where I come from. Something wrong with you.
Wow, Carney, I thought you were just a loser, but you're actually a real-life racist.
Okay, so it's a show about racism? Well, I'd argue that Kaijudo is a show about culture and identity, and the importance of having a group to belong to, but also the importance of being in control of your self-definition. Many of the central characters in the show possess complicated or even contradictory identities. Tatsurian is a mixed fire civilization, earth civilization creature. Rei is half Asian and half white. Gabriel does not behave in a manner typically associated with African-American teenagers, even in comparison to his own family members. Allie's image of a picture-perfect rich girl is anything but, etc. They learn and grow from their family members, both biological and not, and the friends they make, and the myriad other relationships they come across, while still retaining individual agency in determining who or what they are. To summarize what I've described above, and if I'm still being too subtle for you, Kaijudo is a show about a multicultural group of people fighting against a group of wealthy white people with massive technologically advanced weaponry who want to bleed both a foreign location and its inhabitants strive for resources for personal gain regardless of the consequences. And ultimately, that's what I really like about Kaijudo. It sets up a sprawling world with a rich history populated by hundreds of fantastical creatures and uses them to discuss themes of war, oppression, and prejudice. But that's not where the conversation stops. Rei, Gabe, and Allie both witness and are the recipients of these micro and macro acts of violence, cultural imperialism, and pain via their statuses of being mixed race, African American, daughter of a broken household, etc. True, there is a difference between the schoolyard bullying Rei faces and the ease by which Tatsurian's paternal family sent him to die for his blended blood, but the link is still there. Consider Alakshmi's suspicions that her family sold her into the Choten's service for money and ancestral vengeance, and all that implies. The ills of an unhealthy society are not left behind in the safety of allegory and fantasy. They follow the protagonist's home every day. And yes, perhaps some of these themes are discussed a little too very clumsily, but the fact that this show is still willing to have this conversation in the first place is something I appreciate. Stories about fantastical things should not always be absent of concrete meaning. In fact, the best types of fiction help us engage with the problems of reality rather than running away from it. But I think this is why a lot of sci-fi, fantasy, and children's media in general gets a bad rap quality-wise, because of its content in a mechanical sense, rather than its content in a thematic sense. At the risk of sounding like a massive nerd, why? Why do we write off entire mediums and genres as less worthy of academic discussion than others? Is it because 80% of the medium really isn't worthy of critical discussion? Or because large aspects of the genre are highly escapist and don't really have any depth? Okay, maybe. But if you ever want something to improve and to do proper service to what is exceptional, you need to take a genre seriously. I put this to everyone. The first step to having a medium or genre taken seriously by the public is for the fans to treat it seriously. This doesn't necessarily mean heaping buckets of praise or buckets of bile. It means discussing both its merits and flaws in the context of production. Sure, these stories are just for children, but on the other hand, these stories are for children. You know, the formative years of human experience? Surely this is an audience that deserves, if not flat out needs, well-structured fiction to entertain and educate themselves about the world. Asking that a medium or genre be taken seriously does not necessarily mean it must contain adult subject matter. The inclusion of mature elements do not necessarily make a story good, nor does their exclusion render a story paltry. I do think the best kinds of stories come from a creative spark and a desire to be about something grounded in humanity, something that's bigger than the sum of its parts. I want to tell a story about the importance of love, hope, and willpower, even in the most extreme of war times. You could use Green Lantern characters for that. I want to tell a story about grassroots activism in a city undergoing military occupation. You could use Tron characters for that. I want to tell a story about the interrelated nature of family and community. You could use Transformers for that. A well-told story is not based on the color palette, the age range, or the amount of severed heads on screen. It's about having a theme that the story is committed to exploring in an interesting and entertaining way. We live in a world where the Academy Award voters flat out admitted they refused to watch the animated feature films and animated short films, either abstaining or giving the award to the one film they'd watched. This is a world which is woefully naive to the production work that goes into animation of all types, and all types of special effects for that matter too. And if we aren't willing to discuss the medium seriously, how are we supposed to discuss issues within the industry seriously? I don't expect this change to happen overnight. However, this still needs to happen sooner or later, at least for the sake of people working in the industry right now. We have to make hundreds upon hundreds of whiny, nitpicky, overly indulgent videos about it. Where was I? Oh yeah, Kaijudo, it's really good. You should watch it. It's a good show. Kaijudo can be watched on the Hub network if you have it. The complete 2 seasons are available for streaming on Netflix and can also be purchased in the iTunes store. Shout Factory has several episode bundle DVDs available as well, but so far no full season home media release. They're pretty good about responding to customer inquiries though, so if you're interested in this series or a completionist like me, I'd advise you to join me in my crusade of emailing their customer service line and politely requesting that they release the show on Blu-ray like they did with Transformers Prime. You know, I really appreciate the work Shout Factory has put into licensing cartoons and movies and making them readily available at reasonable retail prices, especially as a Transformers fan. After all, preservation and access to media is still unfortunately a huge issue. Heck, they've got a whole line dedicated to releasing schlocky cult films from the 60s and 70s called the Roger Corman Cult Classic Library. That's how I was able to watch Star Crash. You know, I've got a lot of research on the appeal of analyzing supposedly low-class cinema. I might just have to give this a look. But not for a while. Next episode, we're talking about Osmosis Jones.